Everyone hits a bump in the road. What do you do with it? Be inspired as we explore the ways people experience, navigate, and manage the ups and downs and twists and turns in this road trip called life. Welcome to another episode of Bump in the Road. The basic podcast is always free. We also have a premium subscription called Bump 2 that lets you listen in on extended behind-the-scenes conversations with our guests. Check it out at www.bumpintheroad.us. Doug Stoddard has quite a story to tell. The first part of this podcast sets the stage for his bump in the road. The second part, for subscribers only, will explore the themes and wisdom that came from Doug's journey. Themes like identity, surrender, and the importance of listening, and much more. Join us. Use the code FREEMONTH to try out the subscription. You want to hear this conversation. Doug, welcome to Bump in the Road. If you would, tell us your story.
Thank you, Pat. Number of years ago, we had a very successful business, what I considered successful. And we were trainers. We were the people who were leading a very large organization. And then the ownership of that company that we were working with, they were caught embezzling. And the lawsuits against them took us down. And we ended up in bankruptcy. We lost our employees. We lost our income. And at the same time, we have 6 children, wonderful children. And but 2 of those, when they got to the age of about 15, where they tend to know it all, right? But those 2 children, for some reason, decided that they didn't want anything to do with us for over 9 years, and we didn't know why, and it was extremely painful for us. So here I have this bankruptcy going on, and I was very ashamed of that. I didn't know how to recreate the success I had. On the other side, we had very strong relationship issues with these 2 children, and I be honest with you, I felt like a failure. And here I was, I had made very significant income, what I considered significant. And then all of a sudden it was gone. I ended up having to go back to work because I couldn't recreate the business I had before. So I was earning 1/10 of the income that I was. I was no longer the trainer up front, no longer the leader of this successful organization. But I kept trying to look like I was a 10. Who had it all together. But inside, Pat, I felt like a 2. And I had all this negative self-talk going on, how I saw myself as in comparison to myself, to everybody else who seemed to look like they had success. They had it figured out. And I had lost mine. And in fact, I felt like I had lost my identity. And so often we do that. We tend to make our identity external things, our success, the cars we have, or the relationships we have. And if those disappear at all, then it feels like a part of us has just been jerked out of our hearts. And then we feel lost and like we're trying to find ourselves. And so this is what was going on. Like I said, it went on for over 9 years. The relationship with our 2 kids, it felt like every time we did have a rare conversation, it felt like I was walking on glass, very, very awkward, not knowing what to say and just angry at them because we didn't know what we had done. And this relationship issue, even with our daughter, she was our only daughter, and even through her marriage, I mean, it was so awkward, and I didn't know how to fix it. And I wasn't aware of what was really going on inside of my head and what was driving all this. And most of all, I didn't know how to fix it. I didn't know how to fix my relationship with my daughter. And so that's what got me moving towards where I am today, because I just didn't know what to do and how to fix it.
How did you start to dig yourself out of that emotional hole?
Boy, that was a process. It's not it's not a fix it overnight type of thing, which is I'm a habit breaker coach, and so I'm very much aware of the process of what goes on, but we all have a tendency to think that we want things fixed right now. We want it to change, and that doesn't work. That doesn't work. It takes time. And so it was really interesting. After about probably 5 years, 6 years into this whole process, trying to recreate new businesses and nothing seemed to work, I guess I had just got to the point, Pat, where I had to surrender. And so often we get caught up in trying to create life and thinking we have to do it all ourselves and all that type of stuff. But I just got to a point between that 5 year and 9 year period where I began to surrender to what is it that I need to do? Who is it I need to meet? And bit by bit, I started to meet people. And one of those people was a guy named Tom, bless his heart. And he and I started talking weekly, kind of a mini mastermind. And he started giving me some insights into some things. And one day he comes to me and he says, Hey, Doug, I've met a man who's really helped me to understand about habits of thinking and neural pathways and those types of things. And what are you talking about? He says, yeah, man, you need to talk with him. He's really helping me to understand how to communicate with people more effectively and to listen and to create the kind of success you want. Well, it's everything I wanted, Pat. But what I also learned in that moment is that our habits of thinking tend to create the walls between us and everything we want. It seems to put up this wall. And so when Tom said, man, you need to talk with this person and you need to understand how to move forward, I literally fought him for 6 months. Every week, almost every week, we'd have a call, and he was happier. His relationships were changing. He was developing a business that he was very excited about. And every week, I felt like I was digging into a deeper hole. And I just resisted what I really wanted. And it's because of my habits of thinking. They're stored in our neural pathways. But finally, one day, I listened to Tom, and I actually connected with this individual. And man, he really helped me do two things, Pat. The first one is to become more aware of how my habits of thinking and my life story and all these experiences that I looked as negatives and I looked at it as something's wrong with me. He helped me to realize that what's really going on is habits of thinking that are stored to get triggered. And I had a lot of these that were triggered. And so I began to explore this, develop it. And one of the most important things that happened from that is I learned how to connect with my daughter. And that was one special experience that opened the door for everything else. So that was kind of the process, my journey of getting into becoming more aware of how habits of thinking impact us, how they drive our lives, how they drive us to see ourselves and those types of things. So it's been quite a journey.
How did you end up reconnecting with your daughter?
Oh my. Well, I was having a conversation with Tom one day, and my dad had gone, when I was a little boy, 8 years old, my dad had gone through a lot of depression. And at the time, they didn't have anything to really help people who are going through depression. And so I just felt as an 8 year old, my dad had really checked out. and he didn't love me anymore. And that wasn't the case at all, but that's how I interpreted it. And so Tom and I were talking about this, and he says, if you can, here's what you say to your daughter if you ever have the chance to talk with her. And man, I was all ears at this point. Yeah, tell me what to say that will allow me to connect with my daughter. And so he shared it with me. And lo and behold, Pat, 2 weeks later, my daughter had agreed to go with us on a rare trip back east to visit her brothers. And she was married at the time, and her husband was in the military and in training. So she went with us. And she and I were walking across the Potomac River Bridge in Washington, D.C. The White House is in the background. It's June. The cherry trees are in blossom. And she and I were just walking across this bridge. Everybody else was ahead of us. And in that moment, I got the impression that said, now's the time. And so her name's Amy, and she's given me permission to share this. And she's short. Our family is very competitive and in sports and things like that. And so she's short. And I said, Amy, I've been working with a mentor of mine to help me to better understand what I went through when your grandpa had depression. And she loved her grandpa, but he had passed away. And so that immediately caught her attention. And we paused. And so I was telling her this, and I said, and as I've been working with this mentor about your grandpa's depression, it came to me, Amy, that perhaps at some point as you were growing up, I made you feel like you could not measure up. You weren't enough. And if so, I'm sorry. Will you please forgive me? And in that moment, you know how bubbles of time kind of stop, and we're on this bridge and there's all kinds of traffic going by. But with us, we were in this bubble and I couldn't hear a thing. And she was looking up at me and I was looking down at her, and it felt like it must have been 2 or 3 minutes. But then she said, Dad, you did. But I forgive you.
Oh my gosh.
And that simply opened a door. That didn't solve all my relationship problems with her, because in order to heal and repair relationships with ourselves or with other people, it takes time and it takes experience. It takes experiences with them to build this bridge. But in the past, I was the kind of guy, Pat, that would, somebody says something, I would take a stick of dynamite or something and blow up the bridge between us. and, and so I recognized I was the issue. And so in that moment, it set up for what happened next, which was 2 weeks later. She called me up, and which was really rare. I think in the 9 years that we were struggling with our relationship, I think she probably called me after she left home, maybe 6 or 8 times in 9 years. And every one of those, it just felt very awkward. So she calls me and she's crying. And she starts unfolding to me about how for the past 2 years, what the relationship had been with her husband. And it was not good. And yet she had carried that load by herself, all alone, for 2 years. And she begins to unfold this story to me. And in that moment, Pat, I don't know what your listeners' belief system is, but I truly believe in a God, and he hears and knows us. And in that moment, my prayers are going up, God, help me to keep my mouth shut. Don't try and fix her. Don't try and share your stories about all this kind of stuff. Just help me to listen. and to hear the questions I should be asking. And so I did. The call lasted about an hour. And from that time for the next 6 months, Pat, we talked almost every week. She usually called me, and our calls would last an hour or an hour and a half. And at the end of this, and they're beautiful calls, and sometimes her emotions were just coming up, but they weren't directed towards me. It was just had become a safe place, and she needed a safe place. And at the end of this 6 months, we were on a call, and she's all excited because she had received a transfer, or a possibility of transferring her with her company, and it was a promotion. And once again, I was just listening. I wasn't telling her what to do or anything. And at the end of the call, we were both crying, which happened a lot. And I said, Amy, thank you so much for allowing me to come into your life and to just be a part of your life and sharing with me all that you've shared with me over the past 6 months. And once again, there's this pause, and then she says, Dad, anymore, you're the first person I call. And we have a beautiful relationship. I just came back from spending 6 days with her, my wife and I, and our other son. And so that was my journey. That's how I began to repair this process, this relationship. But what I learned in that, Pat, is that it was my habits of thinking that were being triggered. And they're triggered by our life experiences. And it's my habits of thinking that was creating the walls between myself and my daughter. Plus, I didn't know how to communicate effectively. And when you think about it, who do we learn how to communicate from? It's our parents. And who taught them? Well, if you go back very far, there were no classes about how to communicate effectively and listen and ask great questions. And so that was what I learned and became aware of. And so now what I do with helping people is to help them take their own journey to discover their habits of thinking that are blocking their relationships and how they see themselves and how they see other people. And it's just been so meaningful to me to see lives change, because my number one drive for what I do, Pat, is I want to strengthen families. And I feel that families are under attack. And I've just had so much joy in helping people to heal relationships and to change how they see themselves and how they see other people. It's been quite a journey. I've been doing it almost 10 years now, and it's definitely from my heart.
Want to hear more of the conversation? Sign up at bumpintheroad.us as a Bump 2 subscriber. Buy us a cup of coffee. You can give it a go for free. Just use the code FREEMONTH. And thank you for listening today. I hope you found something in today's podcast that inspires you along your own life's path, because sometimes a bump in the road is actually a portal into a more conscious and meaningful life.